Alright, welcome to a little programming tutorial on how to build the game called Shootout. I'll be doing this in Python. If you don't know what Shootout is, or you've never heard of it before, go ahead and check out another video I might post, or maybe it'll just be part of this tutorial. It'll give you a description or a basic idea of what Shootout is, or how to play the game. With that said, this is going to be a programming tutorial, and so we're going to go ahead and just get things started. Whenever I start my games, I like to start with a little just message to tell the player what game they're playing. And so I'm going to start this off here with a little print, welcome to Shootout. You're playing with a friend. This is just an intro to your game. What you say won't really matter. Just describe what the game you're playing is. Great, so we've got our starting sentence over here. The next step is going to be setting up some variables. So I'm going to make a little comment here called set up variables. And the variables I'm going to want, there's a few of them. Normally, you'd have something like this. So we want a variable to store player1 action. And so normally you do something like player1 equals blank and player2 equals blank. And later you'd set these so that, well, players can type in their inputs. That's how it works in Guess the Number and Rock, Paper, Scissors. However, for this game, player1 and player2 actually have more than one variable that we need to keep track of. And so, in addition to this, I'm actually going to specify a little bit. I need to keep track of a player1 action. But in addition to that, I also need each player to have a gun stat, telling us whether or not they're ready to shoot. And so I'm also going to create another variable here called player1 ready, which will be set to true or false. It basically tells us whether or not the player is ready to fire a weapon. Alright, so as you can see, I've created my variables here. Now normally you just have something like P1 or P2, but in this case we want to keep track of both whether or not the player can fire and whether or not they're, or what action they chose to do for this round. And so we've got two variables for each player, and so I've made P2 ready and P2 action. Readiness just tells us whether or not we're able to fire a gun, whether or not we have a bullet loaded in it. And action simply tells us what action we decided to do for this round. We'll start it off by just setting it to blank. Alright, now, I'm going to go ahead and create some space here. I'm going to want a few functions for this code, just to simplify things. And I'm going to keep the functions on the simple side. I'm going to create a function for player1's turn, and player2's turn. You could definitely compress this game by adding more functions, but this is all I like to do, or this is what I like to stick to. So, to start things off, let's start with player1. Figure out a name for this. I'm just going to call it player1, like so. I recommend the name be something simple and straightforward. You don't want to go too in-depth, like player1's turn to make a move. That would be really long. You want something that's just easy to call. So I'm going to call this player1. And that just says, okay, it's player1's turn. This should decide what player1 is doing, or prompt player1 to enter a message. Now, inside this function over here, we want to access our variables, player1 ready and player1 action. This isn't always something I teach immediately, but there is a little bit of a trick with variables when you're working with functions. And it's the difference between local and global variables. When you create a variable, or you're working with variables inside functions, they're generally considered local, meaning only that function sees when you change or create a new variable. What I mean by this is if I were to take player1 ready and I were to change it to true inside the function, it would still be false outside of the function. So only that function can sort of access the local or private variable data. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here in order to fix this is write the word global. And if I write the word global and then follow that with the name of a variable, like player1 ready, this will now make player1 ready a global variable that can be seen by, well, everything outside and inside the function. So it's essentially global, it's no longer private or local. I'm going to do the same thing for player1 action over here. Okay, let's get started on player inputs. So, for this player input, we're of course going to be using input right over here, just to sort of ask the player to enter some sort of input. Now, for my message, let me think about it for just a moment. Alright, now my message for this is going to be along the lines of player1, go. You can reload, block, or shoot, and make sure that you type these exactly how you want the player to write them. That'll just make sure that the player has less bugs or less issues typing in words here. So, player1, go. Reload, block, or shoot. Now, of course, we need to store this somewhere, so I'm going to be setting this to a variable, and the variable that I'm going to set this to is player1 action. So we'll say player one action equals input of, well, whatever is over there. For now, what I'm going to do is go to the bottom of my code here and just call player one so I can see whether or not it's working. And if I just go ahead and save and run my project, as you can see, it says player one go, reload, block, shoot, and I can just type in anything here. It'll save it under player one's action. Alright, so we've got some sort of input, but now we have to do a little bit of a better job getting this input. Currently, it's just going to take whatever we type in, and the computer won't always understand what a human types in. So we've got to set some limits to what can be typed here. First of all, I'm going to put this inside a while true loop, and this way I can basically tell my computer, okay, sorry about that, and basically I can just tell my computer, well, repeat this action over and over again, either until something happens, or in my case, I'm just going to break out of the loop whenever I'm finished. This way I'll just basically spam the question, is player one ready? And if I run this again, we now see that, well, no matter what I type in, it'll always just repeat the message. And once we've got a loop that just generates the question, what we have to do next is sense for a correct answer. And to do this, I'm going to set up a little if statement. If player one's action is to reload, and I'm going to make sure I very carefully spell reload like I did before, or player one's action is to block, then, and to mark that you're done writing your if statement, make sure you include that semicolon over there. We're going to break out of this loop. Just like so. Now, if I run this code here, we see player one go, reload, block, or shoot. I can just type in anything, hi, hello. It won't work. It'll only work if I type in the exact word reload or block, and it'll let me through. Now, note something interesting here. I did not test for the word shoot. The reason for this is because if you're able to reload, then let's say, well, if you're able to reload, if it's even a possible action, you must not have ammo loaded. And if you don't have ammo loaded, you can't shoot. And so what that means is we can actually take shoot out of the option here for now. We're going to assume for now that this code is only running if we have 0 ammo. And that'll basically make sure that we can only reload or block. Now there are ways to compress this code right here, for example, replacing this whole line of if with just a simple if my action is in a list. But we're not going to do that. It's a little bit more of an advanced idea, and this is meant for a class that only understands how to use something like if statements and basic Boolean logic. So we don't want to go too advanced here. Basic loops and basic if statements will do. Alright, so what's next? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to actually want a different message when we want to reload or shoot. If we can shoot, and then we've already got a bullet loaded, we shouldn't be able to reload. And so what I'm going to do is actually indent all of this and put it in its own if statement, depending on whether or not that's true or false. And remember earlier we set this one to false, so if I'm not ready, actually we're going to have to adjust this slightly. We'll say for now, okay, if player one ready is false, that means I'm not ready to shoot my gun yet, we're going to offer the message that says, okay, you can reload or you can block, and offers one of the two there. On the other hand, I'm also going to make an else statement over here, which is simply saying, okay, if I am ready to shoot, we do want to offer the ability to shoot, however, we still want to offer the ability to block. So I'm going to copy and paste my code from earlier, and this time, rather than offering a reload, I'm going to replace that option with shoot. And once again, I have to be very careful about how I spell this. Alright, now, currently what we've got over here is a simple little game that asks for player one's input. It just says, okay, you can do something, you can reload, block. If you type in something that doesn't make sense, it'll just ask you again. But eventually you will type in the right word, and then it'll stop, or it'll stop asking. Now the next step is actually going to be looping the player one command down at the bottom here. At the very bottom of my code, I'm going to simply set up a while true loop. That means basically repeat forever. And I'm simply going to say, okay, player one, activate players one certain. This way, second thought, maybe I'll also say to print blank. Yeah, we'll just print an empty line there. And that way we'll be able to tell when we'll get an empty space when we type in something correct. And so if I go ahead and type in hello, It was not correct, so it's going to ask me again. But if I type in something valid like reload, it'll give me a space because it's saying, okay, that function was finished. But now we're going to restart it from the top, almost like we pressed run twice. Now, the second time we run this, if we've reloaded in the past round, we should now see shoot as an option. But we still see reload over here. And the reason for that is because player 1 ready is still false. Despite the fact that we reloaded, this number was not updated. Our readiness was not updated. And so what we have to do is, and right before we break, we are going to run a little if statement that is going to test if we specifically try to reload. If our action was reloading, then before we break, we are also going to set my readiness to true. In other words, saying, okay, this person's now ready to shoot. That should be working, but before I go ahead and implement that, there is one other thing I want to do. We've got a similar situation with the shooting action. Whenever we shoot, we actually want to change this back to false, because, well, simply put, if we've shot, we no longer have a bullet. And so I'm actually going to be doing the same code over here, but once again replacing reload with shoot, and true with false. Instead of saying, okay, I'm now ready, when I've shot, I'm going to be I'm no longer ready. And the action is what's going to do the actual shooting. So readiness just displays whether or not I'm, well, ready to shoot. Now if I go ahead and click run, we see, okay, reloading or blocking is an option. We can block, we get the same reload block option, we can block again. Nothing happens there. But when I eventually reload my weapon, I'm now able to start shooting it. And so once again, I can, let's say, block as many times as I want. Eventually I'm going to hit shoot, and then I go back to being able to reload because I have no more bullets. So the game is working as intended so far. We've got some sort of player input going on. Very nice and well. Yeah, alright, awesome. So we've just got our player 1 all set up. Now, believe it or not, that is actually the end of this code. If there's anything else you want to add for like fancy text, maybe say, I'm not sure, you could print any messages in the meanwhile. That's all well and good, but this is all the Boolean logic that we'll need, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm actually going to paste it down here into player 2's turn, because player 2 is so similar to player 1. All we have to do is change all the 1s to 2s. And so, of course, this is player 2 instead of player 1, so all I'm going to do is find all the numbers all the number 1s in this second function over here, and replace it with the number 2, just like I have for these top variables here. I'll get to that and I'll time lapse it. Alright, so I went ahead and attached player 2 here, and if I just call player 2 at the bottom, trigger player 2 over here, what we should see is, and I run my code, what we should see is the game will now ask us for input from player 1. You can enter as many incorrect answers that you want, but eventually when you type in a correct answer, we'll move on to player 2. Player 2 once again has the same options. We're going to maybe reload for both of them just to get things moving. And then we get a nice little pause here, and then it goes back to player 1. So that pause there is very important because right now we've got successfully player 1 and player 2 inputs, and they're always correct inputs. If you type in something incorrect like back, which isn't a word, that we're testing for, it's simply going to keep on asking until you type in a proper word like reload. Now, between round 1 and round 2 here, so both players have reloaded, that's all well and good. We've got a blank space, and then we go back to asking player 1 to move. Now, between these states, we want to make sure that after player 1 and 2 have made a move, we want to see if anyone's, well, shot each other. We want to test if someone's won the game, just like in rock, paper, scissors. And so before we move on, at the very bottom of this while true loop, we're going to be adding a bunch of Boolean logic, or if statements in plain English, to test who won the game. Now, just to give you an idea of what these if statements look like. Now, the if statements are going to be as follows. We basically want to test, did someone shoot? If someone did shoot, or test for every scenario where someone's shooting, and see if anyone's killed the other. I'm going to start out with the basic one over here, which is simply going to be, if player 1 action is to shoot, and remember that's only possible if they are actually able to shoot, and player 2's action is to shoot, and you want to be careful with spelling here. So if both players shot each other, then clearly it's a tie, or clearly it is a tie. So I'm going to just go ahead and print a message saying, we'll say the message, both players shot each other, game over. I'll even put a frowny face over here. Alright, now, I finished with my first if statement there. That one's pretty simple. The next one, I'm actually just going to copy and paste a few times. We want to make sure that we name this one slightly different. We want to elif for the rest here. And the following if statements, we also want to test, okay, what if player 1 shot and player 2 did not shoot? They were reloading. If player 2 was blocking, then, well, they block the shot, it won't really matter. So instead we can say test for shooting and reloading, and that will result in a player death. And in this case, since we're testing for player 1 shooting, we could say something like player 1 shot player 2 while reloading. Player 2 1. Sorry, player 1 1. Alright, now, similarly, I'm going to make this same code apply to my player 2 over here, or player 2. What if player 1 was reloading and player 2 shot? I'm going to test for that as well. We're simply going to say elif p1 action is reload and p2 action is shoot, just like so. Then we can print, okay, this time player 2 shot player 1, and player 2 won the game. Now lastly, if all three of these are not true, I actually want to print something else as well. So I'm going to quickly set up a little else statement over here and say something along the lines of this is an interesting battle of wits, nobody was shot yet. And the reason I keep this kind of vague, I said nobody was shot yet. Player 1 might have shot, but player 2 might have blocked. And so that sort of applies to this else statement as well. All I want this else statement to do is separate round 1 from round 2 and round 3. And this is sort of like a flavor text. It just doesn't really inform you that anybody's won, but it also just says, okay, well, nobody died, or nobody lost. And the game's going to continue. Now, just out of personal preference, at the end of this, I always like to just simply print a blank sign. That'll simply say, okay, add some more spacing here, give us some more space to look at. You could also add \n to the end of your sentences, but I find that to be even uglier. So I just spare the extra line here and say print blank. Now before you run this, you are going to want to say break in each of these if statements. You don't have to say it in the else statement, but if any of these are true and the game is over, you don't want to keep running the game, and so I'm also just going to break out of this final loop. But with that, I'm going to quick run, and our code should be working. Alright, my game seems to be working. As you saw from the video, I've done a few tests here. Just try your game, make sure it's working. Now this game does get a little bit, you're probably thinking, what's the point of this game, right? You guys could just block forever. This is meant to be a fast-paced game between real-life people. So generally the game goes 1, 2, 3, and then both players show a hand sign, similar to rock, paper, scissors. They go like maybe shoot or reload, and there's different hand signs for each of those, but maybe it's like 1, 2, 3, reload, 1, 2, 3, shoot, 1, 2, 3, block, 1, 2, 3, block, 1, 2, 3, reload, 1, 2, 3, shoot, something like that. So it's a lot more fast-paced in real life, but this is just a neat little game that I wanted to make in Python. There you have it. Hope this tutorial was helpful. It might not even be used as a tutorial. Use it however you want. But there you have it. Shootout in Python. Enjoy.